Riley Hart had 14 minutes before security walked her out. The badge on her chest had already gone dead. She found out when she tried to swipe into the break room, and the reader blinked red at her like an eye that had finally closed. Now she stood at the nurses' station of St. Augustine Medical Center in Houston, wiping down a counter that did not need wiping. The night shift was bleeding into morning. The monitors still beeped in irregular rhythms. Ventilators sighed. Someone down the hall laughed too loud at something that was not funny. Outside the glass doors, the sky over Texas was the pale gray that comes right before sunrise. Houston smelled like wet concrete and exhaust and coffee. Inside smelled like antiseptic and tired people. "You do not have to clean," the unit clerk Lila said softly. "They fired you, not the Lysol." Riley smiled without showing her teeth and kept wiping. The motions kept her hands busy. If her hands were moving, her brain tended not to. The elevator at the end of the hall opened with a soft chime. Dr. Leonard Bryce stepped out, white coat pressed tie, straight hair neat in a way that said he had showered and slept and definitely had not spent the night wrestling a hemorrhagic shock into submission. "Ms. Hart," his voice carried without him needing to raise it. Heads turned, then looked away just as quickly. "My office, please." Lila flinched. Riley put down the rag, peeled off the blue gloves, tossed them into the trash. "Clock's ticking," she said mostly to herself, and followed him. The administrative wing felt like a different building. Carpet instead of linoleum, art on the walls, soft lighting. No one rushing anywhere. The air tasted like filtered coffee and recycled air. Bryce's office was all dark wood and soft leather. A panorama of downtown Houston shimmered behind him, glass towers catching the first strips of pink light. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit." Riley remained standing. On the desk, a manila folder waited, her name printed across the tab, Hart Riley J. He rested his fingertips on it. "You understand why we are here." Riley stayed silent. Her scrubs were wrinkled and smelled faintly of betadine. There was a rusty brown smear near the hem from a pair of gloves she had pulled off too fast. He opened the folder, glanced at the top page as if he had not already memorized its contents. "Last night at approximately 02:17, you performed an emergency pericardiocentesis on a patient, Claire Madison, without prior imaging, without an attending physician present, and without obtaining the necessary authorizations." He said the words like items on a grocery list. "She was crashing, Riley." Riley said. Her voice was low, rough from a night of shouting over alarms. Bryce's gaze lifted. His eyes were the same color as his office walls, neutral. "There is a process here, he said. "You are an experienced nurse, you know that." She saw over his shoulder the city waking up. Brake lights on the freeway, a metro bus pulling into a stop. The world outside this office had no idea that inside it, someone who knew how to keep a heart beating was being quietly removed. Her jugular was distended, her blood pressure was in the 40s. She could not complete a sentence, Riley said. "We did not have time to get her downstairs for a CT. "You are not authorized to make that call," Bryce replied. His tone did not change. "We are a hospital, Ms. Hart, not a battlefield clinic. We have chain of command, we have liability considerations." Riley's jaw worked once, then stilled. She could have told him about the sound a chest makes when it fills with blood. The way skin turns that particular ash color right before the heart stops. The way the room goes quiet. She could have told him this was not the first time she had held a life in one hand and a needle in the other with no time to page anyone. Instead, she said, she is alive. He shifted in his chair a tiny movement. "This is not a debate about outcomes," he said. "This is about protocol." There it was, the word that made people feel safe. He signed something at the bottom of the page, then slid the document toward her. The termination letter was crisp, the ink still drying. "Effective immediately, 2 weeks severance. We will code it as resignation for personal reasons." He looked up, perhaps expecting outrage, perhaps tears. People often begged in this office, promised to be more careful, promised to never scare him again. Riley picked up the letter. Her name sat neatly above the phrase involuntary separation. "Where do I turn in my badge?" she asked. Bryce blinked. The veiled apology he had been saving for the end withered on his tongue. "Security desk in the main lobby," he said. "They will have an exit checklist. For what it is worth, Ms. Hart, you are a talented nurse. In a different environment with more oversight, you might find a better fit." Riley folded the letter twice, slid it into her chest pocket. "Maybe," she said. She walked out past framed photos of donor galas, past a poster of smiling staff under the words, "Teamwork saves lives." In the stairwell, the air was warmer. Concrete walls, bright yellow safety lines. Her footsteps rang. Halfway down, she stopped and sat on the step, elbows on knees. Her hands rested between her boots, palms up. long fingers a faint tremor if she held them still too long. Thin white scars across the knuckles, another jagged along the base of her thumb. She stared at that one. The stairwell faded. Another night came back sharper and louder. Highway 87, West Texas. The smell of gasoline and sagebrush crushed under tires. Glass glittering in the beams of a flipped truck. Her kid brother Noah on the asphalt chest rising too fast, eyes blown wide. His hand in hers slick with blood. The operator on the phone asking for cross streets that did not exist. "Ma'am, I need a landmark." "There is dirt," 15-year-old Riley had said, voice breaking. "There is nothing. Just get here." 40 minutes later, the ambulance arrived. Noah did not. She had sat in the back of the cruiser, blanket around her shoulders, dry heaving, and she had promised herself something. Not out loud. Just a knot formed behind her ribs. No more waiting. The memory pulled back like a tide. The stairs came back into focus. Her watch ticked on her wrist. 12 minutes left. Riley pushed herself to her feet and kept going. On the emergency floor, the night felt thinner. The waiting room had a handful of people slumped in chairs, faces washed out under fluorescent lights. Coffee steamed behind the triage desk. At bed 12, Claire Madison lay semi-upright, oxygen cannula under her nose hair damp with sweat. Her husband sat on a plastic chair, bent forward, both hands wrapped around hers as if he was afraid someone would come and take her back. Riley paused at the doorway. Claire saw her first. Her eyes were clearer now. "You," Claire said, voice hoarse. "You were the one talking to me with the needle." Riley stepped inside. "Guilty." Claire's husband stood the chair, scraping the floor. "They said you were the one who... Whatever you did, thank you. She could not breathe. I thought..." His voice failed. Riley reached for the monitor instead. Heart rate, blood pressure, all better than they had any right to be. "I'm glad you scared us," she said. "Gives you something to brag about. Not everyone survives a dramatic entrance like that." Claire laughed once, then winced. "My chest feels like someone parked a truck on it." "That means you are still here to complain," Riley said. She checked the IV site, adjusted the drip, then hesitated. There was a note she had scribbled earlier between codes on a scrap of paper. A reminder about the first dose of oral anticoagulant and the way Claire's pressure had dipped when she turned on her side. She pulled it from her pocket, folded it into a neat square, and tucked it behind the plastic sleeve on the chart. "Make sure you tell them if you feel lightheaded when you stand," she said. "Even a little." Claire nodded, eyes steady on Riley's face. "Will you be on tonight too?" Riley let the question hang for a half-second, then offered the smallest of smiles. "Not tonight," she said, "but you are in good hands." She stepped back, letting the curtain fall. At the nurse's station, Lila pretended to be buried in the computer. A resident, eyes bruised from lack of sleep, glanced at Riley, then at the floor. Riley signed out of the terminal for the last time. The screen went blank. It was almost a kindness. She headed for the staff locker rooms, past a vending machine humming to itself, past a sign pointing to the chapel. Above the automatic doors at the entrance, the hospital's logo gleamed in brushed steel. St. Augustine Medical Center. Below it, smaller letters spelled out the slogan she had walked under every shift for the past 4 years. "Every second counts." She touched the badge at her chest out of habit. It did not respond. Outside, somewhere above the concrete and glass, a low sound rolled across the sky. It was too distant to name yet. Not quite thunder, not quite anything at all. Riley did not look up, not yet. She pushed through the doors into the chill of early morning and kept walking. The cold hit her first, then the smell. Out in the patient drop-off loop, the air tasted like dew and exhaust. A janitor was hosing down the concrete, pushing last night's stains toward a drain. The water made pink streaks before disappearing. Riley walked far enough that the automatic doors sighed shut behind her. For a second, silence pressed in. No monitors, no overhead pages, just the weak birdsong of a city that never really got quiet. She pulled the folded termination letter from her pocket, looked at her name, then slid it back. The badge at her chest was a useless piece of plastic now, but the metal clip had left a small bruise at her collarbone. She rubbed it with her thumb. She still had to turn the badge in. Still had to sign whatever form security printed out. Maybe she should at least say goodbye to the people who deserved it. Riley turned around and walked back toward the glass. The doors parted with the same cheerful tone they always used. Inside the lobby, lights were on full bright enough to flatten color. A volunteer at the information desk kept her eyes on the computer screen. The security guard in the corner glanced at Riley's badge, then at his clipboard. "Uhart," he asked. "That is what it says," she answered. He checked something off. "They want you to do your exit paperwork after you clear out your locker. I'm supposed to, stay nearby." He said it like an apology. Young, maybe mid-20s, with the soft shoulders of someone who had never been in a fight that did not involve a customer service line. "What is your name?" she asked. "Trevor." "All right, Trevor, try to keep up." She took the staff elevator up instead of the stairs this time. The numbness was starting to lose its grip, and the tiredness underneath was deep. She rested the back of her head against the wall and closed her eyes while the car hummed. Her reflection floated in the stainless steel, dark hair pulled into a low knot, a few strands loose at her temples, skin pale under the fluorescent lights. The faint lines stamped there by years of squinting into desert sun did not match the badge photo. On the staff floor, the elevator opened to a quieter world. No visitors here. Just a hallway of doors with black nameplates, staff lounge, education room lockers. The lounge door was propped open with a rolling stool. Someone had left the television on mute, a morning show host smiling empty words at a camera. It smelled like burnt coffee and powdered creamer. Riley stepped in. Trevor hovered outside in the hall, pretending to study a fire extinguisher. On the far wall above a side table of old magazines hung a framed board of photographs. She had walked past it 100 times. Today her eyes caught on it. The top line read, "In memory of staff who gave their lives in service." 8 photos. The first was a respiratory therapist who had caught a flu that had not stayed a flu. The second, an ED nurse lost in a car accident coming off a double shift. A paramedic who dropped in an ambulance bay, heart torn open in his own chest. Riley knew these faces' stories traded in the break room, the names said once during a moment of silence. Her gaze moved to the last frame. Captain Naomi Leung, MD, United States Army, killed in action, Sangin Valley, Afghanistan. The picture was in dress uniform. Naomi's black hair was tucked neatly under her cap, dark eyes bright with purpose. That was not how Riley remembered her. She remembered Naomi in dusty camo sleeves, rolled up hands deep in someone's ruined chest. Remembered sand stuck to sweat, a grin that cut through the worst days, the way she swore at incoming mortar rounds like they were a paperwork error. Riley's hand rose before she realized she was moving. Her fingers brushed the glass over Naomi's face. She read the words twice. Sangin Valley. The place where the mission had gone wrong. The place that officially belonged in a file marked removed, and then in an incinerator. Nothing about it was supposed to be on a wall in a civilian hospital in Texas. Her heart gave a small, sharp kick. Trevor shifted in the doorway. "You okay?" "Who put this up?" Riley asked. He stepped inside, squinted at the memorial. "That thing, it has been there for months. Before my time. I just figured HR. HR does not have clearance for Sangin Valley," she said almost under her breath. "What?" "Nothing." She pulled her hand back. The skin of her fingertips tingled where they had touched the cold glass. Somebody knew Naomi's real story. Somebody had sent her name into the world again. Riley left the lounge before her throat could decide if it wanted to tighten. The locker room was at the end of the hall. Rows of beige metal doors, a bench scarred with shoe scuffs, the faint smell of shampoo and disinfectant. Her locker was 16. She spun the dial open by habit and swung the door wide. Inside, her life at St. Augustine fit on 2 shelves. The good stethoscope with heart engraved on the bell. 3 pens, 1 chewed at the cap from long nights charting. A half-empty bottle of cheap hand lotion. A tattered Polaroid of Noah frozen at 17 in a borrowed Letterman jacket, his grin slightly crooked. She peeled the photo away carefully. The tape came up with a soft tearing sound. The building shuddered. It was slight, just enough to make the metal locker doors tremble against one another. One of the younger nurses at the end of the row looked up from her phone. "What was that?" she asked. "Probably construction," someone answered from the showers. "They are always tearing something up on the 4th floor." The vibration came again, longer this time. The overhead fluorescent tubes flickered once, then steadied. Beneath the hum of the lights, another sound reached them, low and rhythmic. A nurse laughed too quickly. "Maybe Houston is finally getting a real storm." Riley set Noah's photo on the bench and stood very still. The sound was not thunder. Thunder rolled. This was a chopping, steady pressure in the air that she felt in her teeth more than heard. Rotors. Every cell in her body seemed to align around that recognition. Her neck prickled. Her fingers curled in a reflex she had not needed in years. Not news choppers, not life flight. Those sat higher, moved smoother. This felt heavier, lower. She grabbed her duffel from the bottom of the locker and yanked the zipper closed. The bag thumped against her hip as she swung it over her shoulder. "What is going on?" the young nurse asked, half joking now, half not. Riley did not answer. She was already moving. In the hallway outside the locker room, a recorded voice clicked on overhead. Calm female, the same one that announced visiting hours and code blues. "Attention all staff. Please remain on your current unit and await instructions from hospital administration. Do not attempt to exit the building. This is not a drill." The last sentence snapped like a wire. Nurses stepped out of doorways, eyes narrowing. A resident jogged toward the main corridor, phone in his hand. Someone swore softly when a set of double doors locked with a solid metallic thunk. Trevor appeared at Riley's side, breathing a little faster. "Do you know what this is?" he asked. "No," Riley said, which was technically true. "Stay out of the way." At the far end of the hall, a rectangle of daylight showed through the window above the fire door. Beyond it, the roof of the parking structure sat empty. Above that, in the narrow slice of sky, black shapes moved. 2 helicopters matte, dark no hospital logos. Rotors clawing the air. They were close enough that Riley could make out the angle of their landing gear as they eased down toward the hospital's helipad. The overhead speakers crackled again. This time the voice was male-clipped, carrying a cadence she recognized from old briefings. "Riley, heart report to roof access immediately. I repeat, Riley, heart report to roof access immediately." Conversations died mid-word. Heads turned. A tech carrying a stack of linen stopped in the middle of the hallway and just stared. Trevor looked at Riley. "That is you, right?" She stared back at him for a second, as if he had asked if she was sure about her own name. "Yeah," she said. Her bag slid off her shoulder and hit the floor with a muted thud. A door at the far end of the corridor slammed open, banging into the stopper. 6 figures in tactical gear poured through, rifles angled down, but ready helmets and vests dark against the pale hospital paint. They moved like a single unit, clearing intersections with glances, boots hitting in a pattern that spoke of drills run 1,000 times in dirt and heat, and places that smelled like cordite. Patients peered from doorways. A mother clutched her child closer. A respiratory therapist pressed herself flat against the wall. The lead soldier scanned the hallway once. His gaze hit Riley and stayed there as if there had been a beacon over her head instead of a hospital badge on her chest. He walked toward her with measured steps, not rushing, certain. As he got closer, she saw the patch on his shoulder. A falcon's stooping wings tucked 3 stars underneath. The colors were muted with wear. Reaper Team 3, the same design on Naomi Leung's frame, only this one was stitched into fabric, not printed under glass. Up close, he was tall with a square jaw that had seen a fair amount of sand and a pair of eyes that did not flinch. "Ms. Hart," he said. His voice had a rough edge, but it carried respect. "Sergeant Mason Cole, we need you to come with us." Around them, the hallway seemed to hold its breath. Riley's back met the cool surface of the wall. Her pulse kicked hard in her throat. Old training shoved down for years rose up fast. She swallowed. "I am not military anymore," she said. Cole's expression did not change. "Colonel Marcus Hale is upstairs," he said. "He is critical. The procedure they taught us as the Hale maneuver is not working. He asked for you by name." The sound of the rotors above them deepened, pressing into the building's bones. Riley closed her eyes for a heartbeat, then opened them again. "Where is the roof access?" she asked. Cole stepped aside, one hand indicating the stairwell door. Trevor took half a step forward. "Ma'am, do you need me to call someone administration legal? I do not know." Riley bent to pick up her duffel. Her fingers closed around the worn strap. "No," she said. "They already called the only people who matter." She tightened her grip, took a breath that tasted like floor cleaner and adrenaline, and walked toward the stairs. The stairwell smelled like concrete dust and old paint. Cole held the door for her, then went in ahead, his team flowing around her. 2 soldiers took point, 2 fell in behind, one stayed at her shoulder. Boots slapped the steps in a steady rhythm that mixed with the muffled thump of rotors overhead. Riley climbed duffel, banging against her hip. Her lungs felt tight, though the air was cool. She kept one hand on the rail, more out of habit than need. At the top, another door waited with a sign that read "Roof Access, Authorized Personnel Only." A hospital security officer stood there, hugging his radio to his chest. His eyes were wide. "It is all yours," he told Cole. Cole pushed the bar and the door banged open into light and noise. The roof was wind and roar. The 2 helicopters sat side by side on the pad rotors, still spinning. Their dark bodies vibrated with contained power. A crew chief crouched near one, giving them the signal to move. Air slapped at Riley's face. Her scrub snapped against her legs. She squinted against the grit that flew up from the tarred surface. Cole had to lean close to be heard. "Stay right behind me," he shouted. He jogged toward the nearest bird. Riley followed, ducking her head under the blade wash. A medic in flight gear reached out and pulled her in through the side door with a grip that knew how to haul weight. Inside, the noise dulled behind the fuselage walls, but still filled her chest. The interior was bare metal and webbing, no padding. Jump seats bolted along the sides. 2 younger soldiers were already strapped in gear, stowed tidy at their feet. Both stared at her with open curiosity. Someone shoved a headset into her hands. Riley fitted over her ears and adjusted the mic. The world snapped into a different kind of sound. The rotors became a background hum. Voices came through clear. "Check comms," a calm voice said in her ear. "Bird 2, you up?" "Bird 2, good," another voice answered. Riley buckled into the seat across from Cole. She set her duffel between her boots. The crew chief slapped the side of the helicopter twice. The pitch of the engine rose. The floor lifted under her. Houston began to fall away through the open door. The hospital shrank to a white block with a cross on top. The parking lots turned into a grid, then into a smear. The younger of the two soldiers across from her kept stealing glances. The name on his vest read Kim. "You really Hart?" he asked between bumps of turbulence. Like the heart notes they showed us in training, except they called it Hale's technique. Riley looked at him. "What did they call it?" "The Hale maneuver," he said. "Field stabilization for penetrating chest trauma, high risk of tamponade, no access to full surgical suite. They told us Colonel Hale developed it after Sangin." Riley's fingers tightened on the seat strap. Cole watched her expression unreadable. He reached into a pocket on his vest, pulled out a tablet, and tapped it awake. "We do not have much time," he said. He said. "I will give you the fast version." He turned the screen toward her. A scan blossomed in shades of gray and white. Cross-sections of a chest cavity, the bright sliver of metal lodged near the heart. Numbers along the side vitals trending in the wrong direction. "This is from 6 hours ago," Cole said. "Shrapnel from an IED secondary blast inside a compound in Aldara. It nicked the pericardium, maybe more. They tried a modified Hale maneuver twice. Temporary improvement, then a slide." He swiped. A new image replaced the first. The metal looked closer to the beating muscle now. The fluid around it was darker. "This is 40 minutes ago. He is throwing arrhythmias, pressure is dropping. They can keep him alive for a bit, not long enough to move him anywhere better." Riley swallowed. "And Hale is conscious." "He was when we lifted," Cole said. "He has been asking if we found you." The tablet's glow painted his face in flat light. "They told us in medic school the first time he got hit, he should have died out there," Kim said quietly. "Guy teaching the module said somebody did things with a chest tube and a welding tool that no one had thought of before." Riley leaned her head back against the vibrating bulkhead. The noise, the smell of hydraulic fluid and metal, the way the air felt thin. It pressed on old pathways. Sangin came back in pieces. Heat so dry it made her teeth ache. The taste of powder in her mouth. The crack and echo of gunfire off concrete. She had been 24 and felt older. They had gone into that compound at midday. Sun-high air shimmering above the bare ground. The intel brief had called it a high-value pickup fast in and out. Naomi had looked at the map and raised an eyebrow. "This is neat," Naomi had said. "Too neat," Hale had shrugged. "We take neat when we get it, Captain." He had given Riley a look that said, "Be ready anyway." She had jogged in behind the second stacked boots, thudding rifle at her chest aid bag heavy on her back. Sand hissed under her soles. The air inside the compound was cooler but smelled like sweat and old oil. The first blast knocked her sideways. A sound outside normal range all punch and light. The wall she leaned toward jerked away from her. Dust turned the world white. For a long second there was no sound at all. Then it came back in a rush. Shouting. A radio screaming. Somebody yelling "contact" over and over. Her ears rang. Her ribs felt like someone had stepped on them. She pushed up anyway. The courtyard was full of haze and motion. Half the roof had collapsed. Reaper Team 3. Her team lay scattered where the shockwave had thrown them. She saw legs sticking out from under concrete blocks. A hand without a body. A helmet rolling in a slow circle. "Hale!" she shouted. "Where is Hale?" He was near the center under a cracked beam, conscious and swearing. Blood had soaked through his vest. He was trying to sit up, which was a bad sign in its own way. Naomi was already there, pressing dressings into place, barking orders at anyone within range. "Get Hart in here," she snapped when Riley reached them. "You see this heart?" Riley dropped to her knees. The taste of dust mixed with iron on her tongue. She peeled back soaked Kevlar. Underneath the wound was high near the sternum, slightly left. Blood oozed thick and dark. "Exit wound," Riley asked. "None I can find," Naomi said. "Listen." Hale's breath was shallow and ragged. His neck veins stood out like cords. Every time his heart tried to beat, the sound under her stethoscope seemed muffled. Tamponade. The word sat cold in her mind. "Birds are 15 out," someone shouted from behind a crumbling wall. "They might as well be in Dallas," Naomi snapped. Riley looked at Hale's face. His eyes were clear and locked on hers. "Do something, Sergeant," he said. "That is why you are here." The aid bag was at her knee. She unzipped it, one-handed fingers already reaching for what she needed. Large bore needle. Tubing. Scalpel. The field cautery tool meant to seal plastic and maybe flesh in a pinch. She had been trained to drain pleural spaces to deal with collapsed lungs. This was not that. The manual said tamponade was a surgical fix, something done under lights with a full team and options. They were under a broken roof with incoming rounds getting closer. She thought of Noah on that West Texas road, breath bubbling out of him while someone on the phone asked for a landmark. Time did something strange. It stretched and narrowed. Naomi Faiz, Riley said, "Hold pressure here until I tell you to move." "What are you doing?" Naomi asked, but her hands never wavered. "Making sure he is still above ground when the birds get here," Riley said. She cleaned a patch of skin that was already dirty again. Her fingers found the notch between ribs counted down, found the angle her training had hammered in. She visualized the heart, the sac around it, the space that should not be filled with blood. Her hands did not shake. She pushed the needle in. There was resistance, then a give. When she pulled back on the plunger, dark fluid surged into the barrel. Hale's breath hitched. The veins in his neck softened. "Keep talking, Colonel," she said. "I am not done with you." He laughed once, which came out more like a cough. "Bossy," he muttered. She kept draining. Swapped syringes, used the cautery tool to kiss off a stubborn bleeder that refused to respect the occasion. She worked in a crouch with grit sliding into her boots. Someone yelled that more hostiles were coming. Park laid down fire. Torres dragged another wounded man past his leg barely attached. By the time the medevac rotor wash rolled over them, Hale's blood pressure had climbed out of the basement. His heart sounded like it belonged to the living. On the landing zone, under the scream of engines and men shouting for room, Naomi had grabbed her arm. "Write this down," Naomi had said. "Every step. Do not let them pretend this was luck." Later, in a fluorescent-lit office somewhere back at base, a colonel with neat hair and a ring on his finger had looked over Riley's report. He had not smiled. "This mission does not exist anymore, Keats," he had said. "Neither does this procedure. You understand?" She had understood the threat as clearly as any order. The memory faded. In the helicopter over Texas, Cole watched her with the same steady focus Hale had used in that courtyard. "The technique you used out there became part of Special Operations medic training," he said. "They slapped Hale's name on it because he outranked everybody. He has been trying to fix that ever since." Riley snorted softly. It did not carry much humor. "How many lives?" she asked. "Last count," Cole said, 247 documented. Kim shifted in his seat. "More that never made it into a report," he added. The Black Hawk banked. The view shifted from fading city to a smudge of sand and low buildings ahead. "We are 5 minutes out," the pilot's voice said in her headset. "Everyone strap in." Riley tightened her harness. She looked down at her hands. The scar on her thumb was pale against the skin. She flexed her fingers once, then closed them. The base rose up to meet them. Concrete barriers, wire tents, and prefab structures all laid out in weary lines. A red cross marked one long tent near the center. The skids hit hard enough to rattle her teeth. The crew chief slid the door open. Hot air poured in thick with diesel fumes, smoke, and something coppery underneath. Riley unbuckled and grabbed her duffel. Cole jumped out first, then turned to offer her a hand. She ignored it and hit the ground under her own power. Voices and movement closed in around them. Medics jogging stretchers. A truck backing up with a sharp beep. Somewhere a man groaned, the sound cut short, as someone pushed something into his IV. Cole pointed toward the tent with the red cross. "Critical care is that way, Wool," he said. "That is where Hale is." As they moved, 2 figures stepped out from the tent flap. One was tall with a familiar slouch and dark hair pulled into a short tail. The other had a shaved head and a face lined by too much sun and too little sleep. For a moment, all 3 of them just stared. "Heart," Torres said at last. Leo Park let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for years. "We thought you were gone," he said. Riley felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief. Not yet. Just recognition. "Not yet," she said. "Where is he?" Torres pushed the flap aside. "Inside chez sa femme," she said. "He is waiting for you." The air inside the tent was hotter than outside. It smelled like iodine metal and old sweat. Lights hung from the ceiling on cables humming softly. Machines lined the canvas walls, some newer, some older than the soldiers lying on cots beneath them. Riley stepped in and had that moment she always had in a new treatment space where her eyes swept once cataloged everything. 2 ventilators, a portable X-ray unit, 3 monitors that still worked, 1 that flickered, a stainless steel table in the center of the tent with a body on it under a sheet. Not a body, a man, Colonel Marcus Hale. His hair was more gray now, what was left of it cropped short. Deep creases bracketed his mouth. A tube ran from his nose. A line snaked into the back of his hand. His skin had the flat, waxy look of someone whose blood had been where it should not. He turned his head when she approached. Someone had not bothered with deep sedation. Pain and something else kept him hovering near the surface. "Heart," he rasped. The word scraped his throat like gravel. "You look terrible." "You look worse," she said. Her voice came out steady. That was something. Torres moved to Hale's right, picking up a clamp before Riley could ask for it. Park stood near the monitors, hand resting on the pole of a fluid bag. A young medic with sergeant stripes and dark circles under his eyes lifted a clipboard. "He lost about a liter in the field," the medic said. "We got 2 units into him so far. First Hale maneuver bought us 20 minutes, second 1 less than 10. Echo shows the shrapnel moved." Riley held out her hand. "Let me see the scans." He passed her a tablet with a scroll of still images. She swiped through them, grainy views of a heart trying to work with an intruder pressed against it. The metal shard was small, sharp, and in all the wrong spaces. The original path had been bad. The new one was worse. The shrapnel now sat in a place where one wrong tug could tear through the ventricular wall or slice an artery. "This is not the same injury you built your protocol around," she said quietly. The medic shifted his weight. "No, ma'am. I mean, yes, ma'am. That is what we figured." He pointed to a spot on the screen. His nail tapped a pale blur. "Here's where we think it is now. The problem is we do not have bypass. We do not have a full surgical rig. We can crack the chest, but getting it out has a high probability of killing him. So does leaving it in," Park said, eyes on the numbers creeping across the monitor. Riley set the tablet down and moved to Hale's side. She put her fingers on his wrist. His pulse fluttered against her skin too fast and too thin. Hale watched her, the corner of his mouth twitching. "They dragged you out of whatever life you were building just to look at my ugly mug again," he said. "You should send them a bill." "Shut up," she said almost gently. "You will mess up your blood pressure." His lips moved in what might have been a smile. It faded quickly. Riley looked around the tent again. She saw what they lacked, but she also saw what they had. Gauze, forceps, that same field cautery tool in a different casing, saline, a crash cart. "The Hale maneuver drains enough to buy time," she said. "It does not fix the problem when the object is this close and this mobile." The medic nodded. "We thought of trying to glue it in place somehow, but we do not have any approved adhesive for internal use." "Approved is not going to cover it," Riley said. She exhaled slowly and pulled at the tie on her scrub top to loosen the neck. Sweat clung to the back of her neck under her hair. "All right," she said. "Who has been working on him the most?" "That would be me," the medic said. "Staff Sergeant Dylan Reese." "Reese, you are with me," Riley said. "Torres, I want you on my right. Park, you are on vitals. Cole, I need someone to keep everyone who does not absolutely belong in here on the other side of that flap." Cole nodded once and turned toward the entrance. Reese frowned. "Ma'am, with respect, we already tried the established procedure twice. Command is going to want to know what you are doing different." Riley met his eyes. "Then watch closely," she said, "because you are going to be the one explaining it." She held out her hands. Torres slipped a gown over her shoulders, tied it in the back, then snapped gloves onto her wrists. The latex hugged her skin. It always felt like putting on a different person. Riley stepped into the circle of light above the table. "Reese, show me where you went in last time," she said. He pointed to a small puncture mark already mottled with purple around the edges. "We went subsiphoid," he said, angled toward the left shoulder. "We got fluid, but then the trace got weird and we backed off." Riley nodded. "You were right to stop when you did. If you had kept going, you would be dissecting the heart instead of the sac." She traced the path in her mind. The RAFE protocol, the so-called Hale maneuver, was built for a specific configuration, a specific kind of crush and bleed. This was something else, similar enough to be tempting, different enough to be lethal. She pressed her fingers gently along Hale's ribs, counting spaces, feeling the subtle give and rise under skin and old scar tissue. "Hale, I need you breathing as shallow as you can manage," she said. "Small breaths, slow." "You always were demanding," he muttered. She ignored that. "Torres, I want 3 packs of combat gauze, opened and ready, plus standard. Reese, get me that cautery tool, the one you have been using on everything except what it was designed for." His eyebrows jumped. "How did you know we did that?" "Because I did the same thing," she said. While they moved, she spoke without looking up. I am going to create a channel to the shrapnel, but I am not going to take it out until everything around it is as stable as I can make it. We will pack around it, use the gauze as a buffer and scaffold. Then we take it in one controlled move. Reese hesitated. What if you grab wrong? Then you better be ready to move fast, she said. And so should he. Park called out numbers. Pressure is 70/40, heart rate 130 and climbing. Rhythm is ugly. Start a unit of O-neg wide open, then slow it once it clears 60, Riley said. Get me a bolus of pressor ready, but do not push until I say. She picked up the scalpel. The handle felt familiar. She focused on the skin just below the sternum, a little to the left, where she had mapped the route in her head. The first cut was small, just enough to open a window. Skin parted. A thin line of blood welled up. She deepened it, careful, measured. No wasted movement. The muscle below had a different give, a different color. Retractor, she said. Torres placed it, pulling the edges apart to open the view. There was not much to see. This was all touch and memory. Riley used a blunt instrument to push aside tissue, avoiding things that pulsed or shimmered with life. For a moment, the room shrank to just the inch in front of her. The heart pounded against the sack, too loud, too fast. She could feel it in the instruments. The shrapnel sat like a small predator waiting for a misstep. The monitor shrieked. V tact, Park said. His voice rose but did not crack. He is going irregular. Charge the paddles, Riley said. 200. Reese moved to the crash cart. His hands shook once, then steadied. Gel. Charge. The whine of power building. Riley kept her fingers where they were refusing to flinch. Clear, Park said. Everyone lifted off. The shock ran through Hale's body, arching his back a fraction of an inch. The monitor scrambled, then coughed a line of chaos before settling into something resembling a rhythm. Sinus for now, Park said. 98 beats, pressure 65/30. Not good enough, Riley said. She nodded to Torres. Gauze. Torres slapped the first pack into her waiting hand. Riley pushed it in carefully along the channel she was making, letting it soak and swell. Not to plug everything, just to build a wall where there had been none. Then the second pack. Then a third, forming a cradle of soaked fiber around a shard of metal she still had not seen with her eyes. The heart pushed against it. The gauze gave, then held. Reese tool, she said. He placed the cautery device in her palm. It was meant for sealing lines and maybe external bleeders, not for delicate work near the core of a man. She moderated the pressure, the timing touching off tiny spots where fluid wanted to sneak past. Outside, a helicopter took off or landed. The tent shivered. Inside, a droplet of sweat ran down Riley's temple and tickled her neck. She ignored it. Park spoke again. Pressure climbing, 80/50, rate 92. That is more like it, Torres murmured. Riley inhaled once slow, exhaled. The world narrowed further. All right, she said. Moment of truth. She reached with a curved clamp, guiding it along the path she had built, feeling for resistance that did not belong. Her fingers read the terrain the way blind people read Braille. The metal touched the jaws with a faint scrape, cold against the instrument. I have it, she said. Do not drop it, Reese whispered, then flushed when he realized he had spoken aloud. Riley closed the clamp and began to withdraw. No sudden moves, no jerks, just steady pressure in one direction. The shrapnel slid, once, twice. The heart beat against the gauze and her tool. The monitor beeped relentless. The piece came free into the open air with a wet sound and clinked into the tray when she released it. It was smaller than she had imagined and uglier, a twisted triangle, its edges tacky with dark blood. For a second, no one in the tent moved. Then Park said, pressure 95/60, heart rate 84, rhythm stable. The breath Riley had not realized she was holding left her chest. Her shoulders lowered a fraction. Do not celebrate yet, she said. Torres, fresh gauze. Reese, keep that tool ready. We just traded one problem for another. They worked in concert, packing where needed, sealing small leaks. Layer by layer, she closed what she had opened, stacking tissue back into a shape that could heal. Hale stayed mostly under drifting. Once his eyes cracked open and found her face. You again, he mumbled. He mumbled. Who were you expecting? She said. The intern. He tried to laugh. The anesthetic pulled him under before the sound fully formed. At last, there was nothing left to do but tape the last dressing into place. Riley stepped back. The front of her gown was streaked with brown and red. Her gloves were sticky. The scar on her thumb stood out bright and clean among the stains. She peeled the gloves off one hand, then the other, snapping them into the biohazard bin. Her fingers shook now that they did not have work. Reese stared at the metal shard in the tray. I need to document this, he said. For the record, for training, they are going to ask. Cole pushed the tent flap aside and stepped in, eyes flicking first to Hale, then to the monitor. Something eased in his stance at what he saw there. How is he? He asked. Alive, Park? Yeah, Park said. More than he was an hour ago. Reese lifted his head. Ma'am, he said to Riley, what do we call this, the procedure? We cannot just write that thing Hart did in the log. Torres wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist and looked at Riley. Call it what it is, she said. Riley glanced at Hale's chest rising in a more even pattern now. She thought of Sangan of Naomi of the years in between where her work had walked around wearing someone else's name. Her voice was rough when she spoke. Write it down as the Hart procedure, she said. Spell it with one T. Reese nodded slowly as if committing the letters to memory. Outside, the rotors kept turning. Inside the tent, the monitor beside Hale's bed kept a new rhythm, one that sounded a lot like someone refusing to leave. 3 days later, the sky outside Riley's window was the flat, worn blue of high altitude. The aircraft vibrated in a way that felt familiar in her bones. This was not a medical helicopter. It was a transport plane wide and gray, its interior lined with metal ribs and netted seats. A row of soldiers slept with mouths open, heads bumping against flak vests. Another row watched movies on silent screens, earbuds and faces passively lit. Riley sat alone near the rear, a plastic cup of bad coffee cooling in her hands. Her duffel was tucked under her boots, the same bag she had carried out of St. Augustine. It slid a little every time the plane hit a pocket of rough air. A crewman walked past, checked something on a panel, then moved on. No one asked her how she was. No one said thank you. They had technically already done that. A brisk handshake on the runway, a nod, a promise that the right people knew what she had done. The coffee tasted like burnt rubber. She drank it anyway. The landing came with the usual screech of tires and the heavy deceleration that made her stomach dip. Then they were on the ground at a base outside Washington, rolling past other aircraft, other lives moving in other directions. On the tarmac, a cool wind cut through the lingering sand and diesel on her clothes. A staff officer in crisp uniform met her at the foot of the ramp. Captain Hart, he said. I am not a captain, she answered. He hesitated. Ma'am, General Foster is waiting, if you would come with me. There was a black SUV. There was a drive through bland office parks and taller buildings with reflective glass that showed her face in a smear of sky. There were security checkpoints and badges on lanyards and metal detectors that buzzed at the wrong moment. Inside the building felt like every secure facility she had ever known. Neutral walls, carpet that swallowed footsteps, no windows in the inner corridors. The staff officer stopped in front of a set of double doors and straightened his jacket. In here, ma'am, he said. He opened the door. The room beyond was too large for comfort. A long conference table sat in the middle, polished to a quiet shine. At least 12 people in uniform already occupied the chairs on one side. Stars and bars gleamed on their shoulders. On the far wall, high-definition screens showed other faces in other rooms, video feeds from places she did not recognize. Conversation dropped when she stepped in. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then a woman near the head of the table stood. She was in her 50s, hair silver at the temples pulled back tight. Her uniform fit like it had been made for her and probably had. The stars on her collar said 3-star general. Her eyes said something else, something that had seen hot zones and cold rooms both. Ms. Hart, she said, I am General Elaine Foster. Thank you for coming. She gestured to an empty chair near the end of the table. Please sit. Riley remained standing for half a breath, then walked to the chair and lowered herself into it. The leather creaked softly. Up close, she could see the folders stacked in front of each person. Many of them had her name printed on a tab. Hart, Riley, J. The letters looked strange on formal paper. General Foster did not sit yet. She rested her hands lightly on the back of her own chair. 8 years ago, she said, you served as a combat medic with Reaper Team 3 in Sangan Valley. During an operation that was later classified and suppressed, you performed an improvised procedure that saved the life of Colonel Marcus Hale and 3 other soldiers. A murmur ran along the table. Not surprise, more like collective acknowledgement of something written in a file that everyone had memorized. You filed a report, Foster continued. You detailed your methods. You did what you were supposed to do. She looked around at her peers for a second, then back at Riley. That report was buried by command. The mission was scrubbed from the record. Your contribution was erased. The word hung there. We cannot pretend that did not happen, Foster said. We cannot undo it. Riley kept her hands on her knees, the scar on her thumb pressed against the fabric of her pants. She felt, rather than saw, the small movements of heads turning to gauge her reaction. On the screens, a man with a neat beard and a woman in a suit watched from some distant, secure conference room. Their faces were careful. Foster nodded to someone at the far end. A younger officer tapped a key. One of the screens at the front of the room came alive with a simple slide. Title, bullet points, a graph. The title read, Heart Procedure Field Outcomes. Under it, bars rose in steady succession. Since your original notes were quietly circulated through channels Colonel Hale should not have used, and we are very glad he did, Foster said, a small flicker of dry humor in her voice. The procedure you invented has been taught as an unofficial adaptation in multiple theaters. She pointed to the graph. 247 confirmed lives saved in combat conditions where evacuation was delayed or impossible. Likely more. She let that sink in. They called it the Hale maneuver at first. That was wrong. It has now been formally renamed the Heart procedure in all documentation. Riley stared at the screen. The number did not look real, though she knew every one of those marks had a pulse and a family. Why now? She asked. Her voice was level. Foster inclined her head. Because your work is no longer a secret, she said. Because you just invented another variation in a forward surgical tent, and we have half a dozen commands asking what you did and how fast they can teach it. Because Colonel Hale, who is currently in recovery, woke up long enough to inform my staff that if we did not bring you in to fix this properly, he would walk down here himself and embarrass us. A faint smile touched several faces, then disappeared. Foster finally sat. She folded her hands on the table. We brought you here for 2 reasons, Shiatek. Ipoi. Yiva Shikskad. The first is an apology that is late. On behalf of the United States military, we failed you. You gave us something that saved lives, and we responded by burying your name. That was cowardice, not caution. The word hung there, too. The second, she went on, is to offer you what we should have offered then. Full reinstatement, rank of captain. Back pay for the 8 years you should have been serving. A position as Director of Combat Medical Innovation. You would be responsible for developing new protocols, training the next generation, and making sure no medic who does what you did gets erased again. The room quieted further if that was possible. Riley let the offer sit. Her heart beat somewhere behind her ribs at a measured pace that did not match the tilt she felt in the ground. Before she could respond, movement at the far corner of the room caught her eye. A man she recognized rose awkwardly from his chair there. No uniform. A suit that looked more expensive than good. A hospital badge clipped to the pocket. Dr. Leonard Bryce. He looked smaller without his office around him. The fluorescent lighting here was less flattering. Ms. Hart, he began. His voice was not as smooth as it had been in Houston. I requested to be present. He cleared his throat. When we spoke last, I was unaware of your service record of your contributions in theater. Had I known, I would have considered matters differently. St. Augustine Medical strives to align itself with excellence. We would, of course, be honored to welcome you back. He glanced around, gauging the reaction of people who outranked him in more ways than one. We are prepared to offer you the position of head of emergency medicine, he continued. Full administrative authority over protocols, staffing input, whatever resources you deem necessary. Your experience would be invaluable in guiding our hospital into a new era of emergency care. His words stacked neatly on top of each other, forming something that looked almost like remorse if you did not listen too closely. Riley watched him for a long second. You fired me 3 days ago, she said. The general's gaze flicked between them. Bryce raised his hands a fraction. We had no idea who you were. You must understand my position. Liability, institutional risk. In the absence of context, your decision appeared reckless. In the absence of context, Riley repeated. Memory flickered. His office, the skyline behind him, the word protocol tossed across the desk like a shield. Claire Madison is alive because I did not wait, she said. You called that recklessness. Now that someone has read you my resume, you call it innovation. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Bryce's cheeks colored. I am trying to correct that mistake. No, Riley said. You are trying to correct how it looks. Silence widened between them. No one rushed to fill it. She turned her attention back to Foster. Your offer, Riley said. This director position. Who would I answer to? Foster considered. On paper to me, she said. In practice to the mission. You would have a long leash. It is why we chose that structure. And when my work makes someone look bad, Riley asked, when a protocol reveals a flaw in an operation plan or shows that a unit was sent in under bad intel, what happens then? Foster did not look away. Then we deal with that, she said. It is not perfect. It is better than it was. Riley nodded slowly. She saw corridors lined with memorial plaques. She saw crescents of sand in valleys that never made the news. She saw nurses in cities and towns who would never sit at this table, who would never have their names on slides, whose instincts were being called trouble. She thought of the look on Lila's face at the nurses' station when security told her Riley was done, of the medic in the tent, Reese, already trying to memorize what she had done so he could teach it even if no one wrote her name on the page. She inhaled once, let it out. I appreciate the apology, she said. I appreciate the offer. She paused. The room leaned in. But I am not coming back to active duty, she added. The words landed without drama, just fact. Bryce's head jerked a little as if he had expected that if she turned the military down, she might turn toward him. General Foster's expression shifted, then settled. "May I ask why?" she said. Riley looked around the room at the stacks of paper, the bars and stars, the screens. "Because there are people out there doing what I did without any of this," she said. "Nurses in understaffed emergency rooms, medics in rural counties, paramedics running calls with gear held together by tape. They will never sit in this room. They will never have a general say their name out loud." She let that picture stand. "If I come back here, I become one more person inside the machine," she said. "Maybe an important one, but still inside. If I stay out, I can build something that speaks to them instead of for them." Her voice did not shake. Foster studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Then how do we help?" the general asked. "For starters," Riley said, "do not erase anyone else. When some medic in some valley turns a piece of scrap into a tool that saves a life, put their name on it. Make it easier for the next person with good hands and a fast brain to do the right thing without wondering if it will cost them their career." Foster's mouth curved not quite a smile. "I can work with that," she said. Bryce opened his mouth again. "Ms. Hart St. Augustine could be a platform for that kind of change. If you brought your training ideas to our emergency department, we could become a model." Riley turned her head just enough to look at him. "You had a chance to be a model," she said. "You chose a different example." His shoulders sagged a fraction. No one came to his rescue. Riley stood. The chair legs scraped lightly on the polished floor. "If there is nothing else, I would like to go home," she said. Foster rose as well. "We will be in touch," the general said. "Not to pull you back in, to support whatever it is you are building if you will let us." Riley inclined her head in a gesture that was not quite a salute. Outside in the corridor, the air felt cooler. The fluorescent lights buzzed. A civilian clerk hurried past carrying a stack of folders, eyes on the floor. The staff officer who had brought her in waited by the elevator. "Ma'am," he said, "do you need a ride somewhere?" Riley thought of the small apartment in Houston, of the heart procedure already moving through inboxes and briefing rooms, of the quiet spaces between those two facts. "I will figure it out," she said. She stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. The elevator doors closed on fluorescent light and starched uniforms. When they opened again in Riley's life, it was 6 months later, and the light was different. It came through tall windows, warm and wide, and fell across rows of chairs filled with people in every kind of workwear. There were uniforms with name tapes and unit patches. There were paramedic polos with city emblems. There were scrub tops in every gradient of blue and green. A sign outside the building read, "Heart Institute for Critical Response," in simple block letters. The paint was fresh, but the brick underneath showed its age. Inside the main lecture hall, 200 people sat with notebooks, tablets, or just open hands. They were young and old. Some leaned forward with elbows on knees. Some sat very upright, as if any slouch might cause them to miss something vital. On the front wall in a wooden frame hung a patch, a falcon stooping 3 stars beneath it. The fabric was faded threads frayed where it had been sewn and resewn onto different sleeves. Under it, on a small brass plate, someone had engraved, "Reaper Team 3 in memory of Captain Naomi Leung, MD in all unsung operations." Riley stood in front of the whiteboard, no uniform, no hospital badge, just jeans boots and a dark shirt with the sleeves pushed to her elbows. A marker rested easily in her hand. She drew a rough outline of a chest cavity, then an exaggerated heart, then marked the pericardial sac around it. "This is where your books say you should stop," she said, circling one section, "because after this point they tell you it is someone else's job." A ripple of low laughter moved through the room. She let it sit. Then she drew a small triangle next to the heart ink, heavy on the point. "This," she said, "is what does not care about your scope of practice." She tapped the triangle. "A shard of metal does not wait for a surgeon. A clot does not hold because your hospital has a 20-minute paging protocol. That does not mean you play hero for fun. It means you learn enough to know what you can do, what you should not do, and where that line actually is." She stepped back from the board. "All right," she continued. "We went over the classic tamponade signs. We walked through the standard drainage technique in the lab this morning. Now we talk about the heart procedure and about the situations where it is the only thing standing between someone and a bag." She did not use slides. She used the board in her hands and the room. As she spoke, she moved them through Sangan without naming it. An injured chest, a distant helicopter, a bag that held everything you thought you would ever have to use. She described the landmarks, the tactile cues, the margin for error. Then she layered on the second story, the one from the tent, where bypass did not exist, and a small piece of shrapnel sat in a place that wanted to kill. Hands went up with questions. What if the monitor fails and you cannot trust the numbers? How do you know you are not just chasing your own adrenaline? What if your attending says no and your gut says yes? She answered each one with specifics. Sometimes she drew diagrams. Sometimes she shared a detail from a call that had ended badly and what had changed because of it. She did not soften the cost. She did not dramatize it either. When she spoke about touch, about feeling the difference between fluid and tissue through a needle, she glanced at her own fingers. The scar on her thumb caught the light. Toward the end of the session, a young woman in a fire department t-shirt raised her hand. Her hair was pulled back tight, her eyes bruised with city shifts. "What do you do?" the woman asked, "when your supervisor tells you to stay in your lane, but your patient is circling the drain? One wrong move and they say it is your license. One slow move and it is their life." The room went still. Riley rested the marker on the tray. She took a breath. "You practice until your lane is wider than they think it is," she said. "You have to be able to tell the difference between panic and knowledge. That comes from repetition, from simulation, from hours and hours of getting it right in here." She nodded toward the lab door at the side of the hall. "And you find allies," she added. "The doctor who trusts your assessment, the charge nurse who backs you when you say something is wrong, the medic who is willing to learn something new with you. You build a little team even if your badge does not say you are in charge of anything." The woman nodded slowly. Her shoulders looked less tight. The clock at the back of the hall crept toward the hour. Riley checked it, then uncapped the marker again. "All right," she said. "We will stop here for today. Tomorrow morning we break into smaller groups and run scenario drills. Tonight go do something boring. Eat real food. Sleep if you remember how." Chairs scraped. People began to stand, talking in low voices. A few made their way down the aisle toward her. A Navy Corps man with tattoos along his forearms shook her hand and thanked her for putting words to things he had felt. A rural EMT asked where to get funding for ultrasound machines. A city ER nurse just said, "I thought I was crazy." And Riley answered, "You are, but in the useful way." When the last of them drifted out, the hall fell quiet. Riley gathered her notes, which were more for them than her at this point. She wiped the board clean, leaving only the faintest ghost of the heart and triangle. In the small office off the side of the hall, a stack of mail waited on her desk. Most of it was dull. Invoices, a request for speaking at some conference, a letter from a rural clinic in Montana asking if she could send someone to train their staff. On top sat an envelope with a military return address. The handwriting on the front was compact and precise. She sat in her chair, set her boots on the floor so the old wood groaned, and opened it. "Riley, I'm told I am not allowed to pick up anything heavier than a coffee mug for the next month. I am ignoring that with this letter, but do not tell my cardiologist. Retirement papers are in. 28 years in uniform. They gave me a plaque and a cake that was dry. They also gave me a packet with your name on it." Director of Combat Medical Innovation declined. They looked confused. I did not. "I heard a rumor you started a place of your own. They say you are teaching kids how to do what you did to me both times, so I thought I should at least offer to come make sure you do not oversell my part in it. If you have room for an old man with a chest full of hardware and too many stories, I would like to help. You have 2 of my lives on your ledger. I would not mind spending the rest of whatever I have making sure other people get the same shot. Hail." The corner of her mouth lifted. She read it again, then pulled a blank sheet from a drawer. She wrote in her own cramped print, "Marcus, we start new rotations on Monday. We have room. Bring your stories. The hardware can come too, might make for a good visual aid. Plan on teaching morning sessions and drinking terrible coffee in the afternoon. Welcome to the only job where ignoring your cardiologist counts as professional development. Heart." She folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and set it on the corner of the desk to mail on her way out. By the time she locked the office, the sun had slid lower. The hall lights cast long rectangles across the floor. Outside, the air was cooler. The institute sat on a slight hill overlooking a stretch of city that still felt like it was figuring itself out. Old warehouses converted into studios. New houses squeezed between older ones. Riley stepped through the front doors and let them close behind her. The glass caught a reflection of the Reaper team patch inside, then the patch vanished in the angle of the frame. High above, a helicopter crossed the sky. Civilian medevac painted with a hospital logo she knew. Its rotors chopped the air, the sound rolling down a second later. She looked up, watched it move from one end of her view to the other. Her heart did not kick. Her hands did not clench. The thump of the blades slid into the background of the evening, along with the distant siren of a fire truck and the rumble of traffic. Down the steps, a cluster of students lingered by the parking lot, still talking, gesturing with their hands, the way people do when they are replaying a story. One of them laughed a sudden bright sound. Riley walked toward them, boots on concrete, shoulders loose. As she reached them, they straightened a little, the conversation pausing as if waiting for a cue. She glanced at the fading light, then at their faces. "All right," she said. "Break is over." The grin that followed was quick and real. Let us get to work. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.